The following episode is written and produced by the True Crime Family and distributed by Leeward Podcast Productions. It may include descriptions of violent acts and objectionable language that could offend some listeners. Please consider yourself warned. Now, on with the show. And now, the conclusion of Killer Profile, Sarah Kolb. On a cool and crisp January day, back in 2005, a man walked across a Taco Bell parking lot intent on a well-earned lunch break. But he didn't make it. At least, not yet. A car in the lot grabbed his attention. No, not because this automobile was especially cool. The four-door red Geo Prism was nothing eye-catching even when it was new, which this one was not. It was the motions of the parked vehicle that caught his attention. The up and down bouncing, the back and forth jerking continued while the windows, reacting to the collision of warm and cold air, created a thickening frost shield from the outside world. The man took a moment and considered his options. Should he intervene? After all, even if the car was just responding to the amore within, this was noon in a fast food parking lot, not twilight on some hilltop lover's lane. Still, was it his business to get involved? Everyone else around him seemed to ignore the scene. Why shouldn't he? Regrettably, what those nearby couldn't tell from the bouncing, and what they couldn't see through the windows, was that the individuals within this vehicle had already crossed the thin line between love and hate. In that spot, sandwiched between a busy drive-through lane and a major city avenue, a desperate 16-year-old girl struggled one against two. No, not in the throes of passion, but a fight for her very survival. As the man shrugged the scene off to teenage shenanigans and continued on his path to lunch and what remained of his day, the last gasps of this young girl's future went up in smoke, and her bodily remains would soon follow. What they also didn't know at the time was that the other girl present, the driver of the vehicle, had constantly and consistently threatened various forms of murder on her family, lovers, friends, classmates, and strangers for years. Her words of malice and violence, both verbal and written, had yet gone unheeded. Unfortunately for Adrianne, this time Sarah Kolb had kept her word. This is the True Crime Family Killer Profile of Sarah Kolb.
Found the body.
Manhunt underway.
Murder of an 8 killed in a park here in New York City.
Shallow grave.
Searching in a nearby pond for clues.
The stabbing death murder.
Leeward Podcast Productions proudly presents the True Crime Family Unsolved Crimes. Join our host Nathaniel and a rotating member of his family each week as they focus on an unsolved missing person or murder victim. Listen in as this family of armchair detectives unfold the mysteries surrounding the people, places, and events, and then propose, discuss, and debate their personal theories. Participate in their efforts to bring attention to these cases and help further the cause that these families deserve answers and these victims deserve justice. If you are a true crime fanatic, do yourself a favor and find the True Crime Family Unsolved Crimes on Apple Podcasts, Google, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts today. And don't forget to check out our other wonderful podcasts on the Leeward Podcast Productions Network at leewardpodcasting.com. Welcome, and thanks for listening to the True Crime Family Killer Profiles. I'm your host, Nathaniel, and with me, as always, is my partner in life and in true crime, Crystal.
Hi, everyone.
All right, today we're covering the conclusion of Sarah Kolb. But before we get started, is there any news we need to pass on to our fans?
Yes, there is. Greggory appeared in the very recent news. According to KWQC TV6 News, a man convicted of murdering an East Moline teenager over 15 years ago was back in court Thursday morning. Greggory was sentenced to 45 years in prison with a chance of parole after 42.5 years. Now at age 33, Corey Greggory returned to court for a resentence status hearing, and Illinois Supreme Court ruling found that 40 years for a juvenile was considered a de facto life sentence and is unconstitutional. In 2019, a Rock Island County judge ruled Greggory will receive a new sentencing hearing. The Illinois Supreme Court later upheld that ruling. The courtroom was mostly empty Thursday morning, with the exception of Adrianne's stepmother, Joanne. She is quoted as saying, "How does he have the nerve to ask for a resentence hearing when he prosecuted her and carried out her death penalty? Reynolds, it doesn't seem fair at all. Adrianne doesn't get to come home. I feel like he can walk out of prison the day Adrianne gets to come home. That's when he can get out." She continues to attend Greggory's hearings because she wants him and the judge to know that Adrianne is loved and still has a family who cares. "I think it's important for the judge to know we're still here," she was quoted as saying. "We're still here for the fight. We're still here to see that justice is served. It's time to let Adrianne rest in peace." Greggory will return to Rock Island County Court on July 1st. The judge agreed to bring an expert to evaluate his mental health. Kolb's appeal for a resentence was denied.
All right, so we've got some good news there. Sarah Kolb's was outright denied. That's fantastic. It appears that he still has some legal wrangling to do, and part of me has to say that clearly he's nuts, and we're going to cover that, throughout the end here. But I got to say, I agree with the family. I think it's great that they continue to show up in court, but at the end of the day, Adrianne doesn't get a second chance. So
Absolutely.
in this person's opinion, neither should he. This is already more chances than he should have gotten.
I agree.
All right. Well, feel free to contact us if you feel differently. That's enough of the business. Are you ready to get started with the conclusion of Killer Profile Sarah Kolb?
I sure am.
Excellent. Let's get started. On the evening of Friday, January 21st, 2005, Joanne Reynolds returned home. It didn't take her long to realize that something was not quite right. Adrianne got out of class every day at noon and was home throughout the afternoon hours, yet none of her chores had been completed that day. Still, a teenager blowing off her chores, even if out of character for Adrianne, was hardly proof positive that something dire was afoot. Then Joe passed Adrianne's room and noticed that the girl's work uniform was still there, laid out and ready for a shift that was already in progress, and that was worthy of alarm bells. Adrianne loved her job at Checkers. If she was supposed to be at work by 5, she would be there, and with plenty of time to spare. When it came to her job, a late or no-show was not in Adrianne's vocabulary. This fact felt like enough for Joanne to alert Tony, who was home from his truck driving shift, that something was wrong, and for her to begin calling family and friends in an attempt to locate the teen. Even after Joanne's phone calls produced no results, Tony was not overly concerned. Experience had taught him that Adrianne could be unpredictable, even more than most teens, and that's saying a lot. However, he did think it was worth a quick drive over to Checkers. They headed out to the restaurant together, but where uncompleted chores and an unused uniform set off Joe's motherly instincts, what the Checkers manager told him set off Tony's fatherly instincts. Adrianne had not picked up her check. What teenager would willingly leave money on the table?
Absolutely. I know ours sure won't.
And for the next few hours, Tony and Joanne worked the phones and spoke with anyone they could think of that might know Adrianne's whereabouts. By 8 p.m., they both agreed it was time to get the East Moline Police Department involved in their search. Shortly after the EMPD received the call about Adrianne, a patrolman was out meeting with her parents. He took down a report, including details about the girl's troubled past, and assured the couple that they would take the matter seriously and work quickly. After all, Adrianne had a documented past of suicide attempts, mental health problems, drug and alcohol issues, and had been bounced between various states, families, and homes. Basically, a good kid who had already traveled too rough a road. Time was of the essence if this situation was to have a chance at a happy ending. The officer retraced the phone tree provided by Tony and Joe. At some point in the early discussion, two names kept coming up: Sarah Kolb and Corey Greggory. He reached out to Sarah Kolb first. Kolb admitted right out front that she was not Adrianne's friend, but that she had seen the girl that day, lunch at Taco Bell. She claimed to have given Adrianne a ride and dropped her off at the McDonald's across from her home. Why that drop-off location? Sarah claimed it was at Adrianne's request because her father would be upset that there was a boy in the car with them. And that boy? Corey Greggory.
Very clever, already prepared, but not a very polished excuse.
Absolutely. And the short conversation ended with Sarah pushing the idea that Adrianne was a likely runaway, while providing a list of names that the officers should check out. She also made a request that, if they did find Adrianne, to let her know. An interesting desire given that Sarah started the conversation, emphatically denying that they were even friends.
Already holes in the story.
Yeah, it's a strange request. I would assume that the police officer, would already be asking himself, if they weren't friends, why is she so interested in being kept in the loop?
Absolutely.
The officer then turned his attention to Corey Greggory. Their conversation matched Sarah's perfectly, almost too perfectly, right up to the moment Corey slipped in an additional detail. An argument between the girls had broken out during their trip. It's possible that Corey quickly recognized his mistake because he ended the call abruptly with the McDonald's drop-off as his last contact with the girl. Nothing further to add. Two things were becoming increasingly clear. Something was rotten in the city of East Moline, and all roads led to Sarah Kolb and Corey Greggory. There is no question Corey dropped the two into the soup, and it wouldn't be the last time. To a seasoned professional, that little slip by Corey was enough thread to start pulling their story apart. It was time for a bit of divide and conquer as the officer refocused on Sarah with the new information in his hip pocket. However, Slick Sarah seemed already prepared with ready answers to the officer's probing questions. She admitted to asking for Corey to leave out the ever so small detail of the girls' disagreement, reasoning that the truth might make them look bad. When confronted for more detail about the argument, Sarah explained that they had a verbal quarrel about some notes that were passed from Adrianne to Corey. These alleged notes were confessing that Adrianne liked him and wanted to hang out with him, without Sarah. According to Sarah, this was something neither Corey nor Sarah herself wanted. Pressed further, Sarah copped to the fight briefly turning physical, with a few punches thrown, including giving Adrianne credit for landing a pretty hard shot. Sarah claimed the two girls then came to a resolution that they would stay away from each other and that Adrianne would stay away from Corey. The story then connected to the earlier version where they dropped her off at McDonald's and they haven't seen or heard from her since.
So the story went from, oh yeah, just dropped her off at McDonald's to, oops, forgot to tell ya, we got into a physical brawl.
You think that's bad? Just hang on. It's going to get worse. Sarah's changing story and the admission of her physical violence was more than enough to request that she come to the station for a formal interview on Monday. The weekend passed with no sign of Adrianne or word of her whereabouts. Sarah showed up for her interview with the police, but not alone. She arrived at the station with her mother and lawyer. During the interrogation, Sarah methodically and calmly repeated the same story she had already shared with the police. By the meeting's end, the only thing the authorities were sure of was that Sarah Kolb knew more than she was letting on. However, they would need more evidence to hold Sarah any longer, so they let her go. Tuesday came, and the police took their shot at Corey. He also arrived with an attorney and repeated the same story he gave over the phone. Young Corey was not as cool a customer as Sarah. Even though he stuck to the same details, his body language and attitude was telling a different tale. By the end of the interview, the police were sure of two things. First, that neither juvenile was telling the whole truth. Second, Corey was the most likely to crack first.
Sounds like, unlike Sarah, his conscience was getting the best of him.
Well, absolutely, and they were spot on. It only took a few hours after they let Corey go for him to break down to his father and then his family. That very afternoon, mere hours after his interview, Corey's father contacted the police and let them know they were coming back in, and that they had quite a different story to tell. This case is one where the facts of the crime are interwoven with a number of he said, she said discrepancies. Some of the disputed claims can be challenged by physical improbabilities, while others can be pieced together by statistical likelihoods. The rest, I believe, can be scrutinized by taking the character of the perpetrators into account. What we do know is that on Friday, January 21st, 2005, to the surprise of everyone who heard, Sarah sent out an invitation for Adrianne to join her for lunch. At the noon hour, 4 people pulled out of the Blackhawk Outreach Center parking lot in Sarah Kolb's red 4-door Geo Prism. Sarah Kolb was the driver, with Adrianne sitting passenger. The back seats were filled by Corey Greggory and one of their friends, Sean McKettrick. On the drive to the Taco Bell, Sarah verbally confronted Adrianne. We don't know the exact words that were used, but the gist amounted to a demand that Adrianne back off her people and territory, especially Corey. Adrianne's defiant responses centered around no need to listen to Sarah and that she would continue to do as she pleased. It's a short trip from the school to Taco Bell, and most of it was filled with their escalating argument that day. When they pulled into the parking lot, what was verbal turned physical. At some early point during this altercation between the girls, most likely when it was still in the yelling stages, Sean told them he'd had enough and exited the vehicle. He seemed to have decided that a walk from the Taco Bell back to the school was preferable to getting involved in their mess. Understandable. Corey, on the other hand, claimed early on that he stayed for the whole event, but that he remained transfixed on the window, staring at the outside in an attempt to ignore what was taking place on the inside. Unlikely. Kolb had already confessed to the police that punches were thrown, and that Adrianne landed a solid one on her nose. However, Sarah left out the fact that she grabbed a wooden stick, possibly a hatchet handle that was kept in the car for her protection, and started beating Adrianne with it. She also left out that, impressively, Adrianne kept fighting back as the struggle devolved into wrestling, punching, slapping, hair pulling, and neck grabbing. Oh, and Sarah definitely left out the whole Adrianne was fighting for her life as she was being choked to death part. If Corey's account is to be believed, he continued to stare out the window as the fight escalated, struggling internally as to whether he should get involved or not.
Really get involved or not? 2 girls are fighting and one is getting beaten with a wooden stick and he just stares out the window? Huh?
Like I said, unlikely. By the time he finally decided to get involved, there was nothing he could do. Adrianne was already gone. That's Corey's story. If Sarah's account is to be believed, the girls' argument turned physical and they started trading blows. However, and much to Sarah's shock, Corey finished the fight by wrapping his belt around Adrianne's throat and strangling her to death from behind.
Okay, so we go from staring out the window to taking off his belt and strangling her?
Well, it depends on whose story you believe. According to Corey's, he just stared out the window until she was dead. Now, according to Sarah, she and Adrianne were having a dust-up, and Corey stepped in from behind and strangled her to death with his belt. But what we do know is that young Adrianne, regardless of whose version you believe, after a valiant attempt to defend herself, ended up in the back seat, her life cruelly taken by cold hands and a warm belt around her throat. The pretty Texas teen, now victim to a broken girl's paranoid jealousy and the boy who sold his soul to her, and, with the deed now done, they shared a smoke in the middle of the busy lunch hour traffic and contemplated the disposal of Adrianne's earthly remains. Now, before we make our way to that, I would like to play a few recordings so you can hear the chilling voice of our killer for yourself.
Hello, is this Sarah?
Yes, it is.
This is Officer Allen, East Moline Police Department.
Hi.
Are you friends with Adrianne Reynolds?
To be honest, no. I don't like her.
Okay. You had contact with her today?
Yes, I did.
When was her a ride somewhere?
Yes.
And you dropped her off at McDonald's or something like that?
Yes, sir.
Okay, why?
Because she said that she didn't want her parents to see that she was in a car with a boy. I'll be honest with you, I hit her.
Okay.
She hit me back,
Okay.
and all props to her. She hit me pretty hard, too. But the point is, we got into, it was like
While you were driving?
No. We were not driving.
Where were you at then?
We were actually going to go to Taco Bell to eat, and get the half-pound whatever.
Right.
And I pulled in the parking lot to talk to her about it because I was pretty upset
Is this
about
the
it.
McDonald's parking lot you were at?
No, Taco Bell.
Okay.
And that's where all this happened. I hit her. She hit me back. My friend got out of the car, and he walked back to the school. And Corey was like, just he didn't want to be a part of it. And
Corey got out of Taco Bell?
no. Sean did. Sean was with us.
Sean
Yes.
Dietrich was in the car
Yes.
at Taco Bell.
Yes.
Okay. And was Corey in the car too?
Yes, Corey was in the car.
Okay. So Sean gets out.
And walked back to the school.
Okay. And then what?
And then she was like, I don't want to hate you, and, I don't want to be a part of this, and I swear to God, she was crying. She's like, I'm afraid that you're going to beat me up or whatever, and da-da-da-da-da. And I was like, you know what? You're not even worth it. I'm not going to get in trouble over some stupid minor.
I don't know what to say. I'm just speechless.
I can certainly understand that and concur with that sentiment. And it didn't take them long to decide to bury Adrianne on Sarah's nearby family farm. It's easy to imagine, based on Sarah's history, that she had visualized burying bodies there long before she contemplated this act of murder. However, at some point it dawned on them that it was January and the ground was frozen. With all the conflicting and changing stories, we don't know if this realization occurred to them during the conversation or if they actually tried to dig a hole in the frozen earth. But either way, they changed course and moved forward with a new plan. The two teens went to Sarah's house in Milan to retrieve some gas cans and then headed out to the farm. Plan B was cremation. When they arrived, they headed to an isolated back edge of the property and removed Adrianne's body. While wrapped in a tarp, they doused the girl's remains in gasoline and started a grotesque blaze. This time it took them much longer to figure out the issue with Plan B. The issue that it takes upwards of 2,000 degrees to incinerate a body, and instead attempted to complete their task by just adding more gas 3 or 4 more times.
This just keeps getting worse.
Yes, and they eventually realized that their plan was just not going to work, and, now out of ideas, decided to give up for the day. Once finished covering and camouflaging Adrianne's charred body with some surrounding brush, they headed back into town. On the drive home, Sarah reminded Corey that she had to work a shift at the local movie theater on Saturday, so their continued cover-up would have to wait until Sunday. They would use that time to come up with another plan. The sun was now set on the first part of their evil deed by the time Sarah dropped Corey off at his place. She then continued on to her home for the night.
So their plan was to leave her charred body for days hidden till they could just figure something out. What? This is just horrifying. An innocent girl's life was just lost.
Absolutely. And unfortunately for everybody, it just gets worse. On Sunday, they returned to the grisly scene. This time they brought another friend, now turned co-conspirator, Nathan Gaudette. A prior consensus had been reached that all would be well if they separated the head and hands from the rest of the body and disposed of the parts in different locations. Corey and Sarah had reached out to Nathan and asked if he wanted to see something morbid and cool. And all he had to do in exchange for this privilege was to bring a saw with him. Their friend had agreed to those terms and joined them on their trip back out to the farm. It was now Nathan who went to work dismembering Adrianne's body, while Sarah and Corey looked on, cracking jokes and laughing with each other.
What? This is just terrifying.
Well, with the next part of their evil deed done, they placed her head and hands in trash bags and loaded them into Sarah's trunk. What remained of Adrianne's body they dumped into a ravine and covered the evidence over in branches and brush. The trio decided they were far too hungry to immediately deal with the contents of the trunk. Instead, they smoked some more weed and headed to McDonald's for some lunch.
Hungry, who could eat after that?
Well, I find that entirely telling that they can go through that and the next thought is, I'm hungry. And once they finished their meal and they were high just enough, the group headed out to the nearby Black Hawk State Park. Once there, they grabbed a shovel and the bags containing Adrianne's removed parts and walked into the interior of the park to find a good burial spot. Instead, they stumbled upon a manhole covering and removed the cover, callously tossing the bags down within. Convinced that Adrianne was gone for good, the teens returned to the car, believing they could simply return to their lives as if nothing had happened.
Nothing happened. A girl was just brutally murdered.
Well, as we know, Corey made it all the way from Friday to Tuesday afternoon before he broke, claiming he had not slept a wink since the beginning of the gruesome ordeal. During the hours of long taped interrogation, Corey laid out his version of events. Throughout, the officers present knew one thing for certain. Although the highlights of the events had the ring of truth, his constant distancing himself from the actual acts smelled off. According to Corey, it was all Sarah. Everything. The poor boy was just a bystander to the deed and to help clean up the mess.
He strangled her with his belt.
Well, now remember, that's according to Sarah, and we're going to talk about that later. The police needed one certainty that night, to know that Adrianne was in fact deceased, murdered. To that end, shortly after 11 p.m. that same night, they took Corey to the Black Hawk State Park and directed him to show them the location of the first half of poor Adrianne's remains. And so he did. With no doubts remaining, the police were left to notify Tony and Joanne Reynolds of the grim news. By 2:30 a.m. on that cold Wednesday morning, Tony and Joanne were facing the news that Adrianne would not be walking through their door this or any night again.
Goodness, how those parents must have felt, not only losing a child, but also trying to grasp all the events that had just taken place.
Indeed. And later that morning, the police took Corey out to the farm to show them to the remainder of young Adrianne's body. Even the most seasoned of those present were taken aback by the sight. Unlike the bags from the previous night, where only a few witnessed its contents in the dark of night, this was on display for them all to see in the light of day. With all of her bodily remains now in hand, what had started out as the search for Adrianne was now the pursuit of justice for Adrianne. While they already had one, it did not take them long to get the warrant for the second. On Thursday, January 27th, they scooped up the ringleader and introduced her to the inside of a cell.
Thank goodness.
Although they had hoped Sarah would give them her side of the story, she lawyered up and waited for trial. On the 1st of February 2005, just 11 days after Adrianne was murdered, Sarah Kolb and Corey Greggory were both charged with first-degree murder and concealment of a homicide. They both pled not guilty to both counts. On Halloween, the 31st of October 2005, Sarah Kolb began her trial at the county courthouse in Rock Island, Illinois. Over the next 2 weeks, the prosecution introduced Sarah's own journal against her, which included an entry the day before the murder that mentioned Adrianne and that she, Sarah, would expletive kill her, Adrianne. The prosecution also called over 50 witnesses, including the poor man who walked by the incident on the way into the Taco Bell, and their friend and co-conspirator, Nathan Gaudet. Nathan casually told the jury how he had dismembered Adrianne and aided with disposing of her body parts. His reasoning? He was just there to help out some friends. The notable missing exception in this long parade of witnesses was Corey Greggory. The defense, on the other hand, put one lone witness on the stand, Sarah Kolb. With no emotion, Sarah used her defense time to paint Corey as the perpetrator and her as the bystander. She did own up to the initial argument, some yelling, and even hair-pulling. Then, much to her supposed complete surprise, Corey reached in from the back seat and choked poor Adrianne to death with his belt. From that point on, it was all Corey. She had no choice because if she didn't help him cover it up, and do right by him, Corey would kill her, her family, and even her cat. What could she do? Sarah also offers as further evidence of her innocence that she has ongoing issues with her hands and lacks the strength to strangle anyone to death.
So according to her, she was just forced into this all and was in her mind innocent? I'm sorry, I don't think so.
Well, after Kolb completed her testimony, the defense rested. On November 15th, 2005, the judge rocked everyone following the case with the news that they had a hung jury. After 15 hours of deliberation, they were deadlocked 11-1 for conviction. As shocking as it was, the state made it clear they were not giving up, but would be pushing for a change of venue. The prosecution got their wish, and on the 9th of February 2006, in Dixon, Illinois, Sarah Kolb went back on trial for murder. Most present admitted that the state tried the same case, while the notable difference for the defense was the absence of Sarah Kolb taking the stand. However, simply leaving the emotionless Kolb off the stand did not make the difference her defense was hoping. On February 22nd, the jury came back with guilty on all counts. Sarah Kolb was later given 48 years for the murder conviction and 5 more years for the charge of concealing a homicide. The sentences were ordered to be served consecutively for a total of 53 years. Corey Greggory, on the other hand, opted to not take his chances with a jury. He pled guilty and was given 45 years for his role in the murder of Adrianne Reynolds, a role that he, to this day, continues to put off on Sarah Kolb. For Nathan Gaudette, the admitted butcher of poor Adrianne's body, he was sentenced to 5 years for concealing a homicide.
5 years only?
That's correct, 5 years. And Nathan Gaudette ended up serving almost 4 of his 5-year sentence. On November 11th, 2008, he was released from juvenile detention. Little is known about his life after jail. However, we do know that on April 16th, 2012, at the age of 23, Nathan's life, along with 2 other victims, ended in a fiery crash in southern Indiana when their automobile struck a tree. As for Corey Greggory and Sarah Kolb, both continued to serve their sentences for their actions back in the winter of 2005. However, there has been some continued legal wrangling by their defense team lately. In 2012, the U.S. Supreme Court issued a ruling that imposed a mandatory life sentence of life without the possibility of parole on a juvenile offender was considered the offender's age and its attendant characteristics was unconstitutional. Following this ruling, in 2016, the Illinois Supreme Court ruled that the 2012 decision covered de facto life sentences, taken to mean that the sentences over 40 years for juveniles is to be considered life. These 2 rulings opened the door for both Sarah Kolb and Corey Greggory to petition for new sentence hearings. As of now, Corey Greggory is still serving his sentence in the Pontiac Correction Center in Pontiac, Illinois. Now, I'm not going to hazard a guess at the outcome of his resentence hearings as it works its way through the courts, but we will keep you posted. As of now, Sarah Kolb is still serving her sentence in the Logan Correctional Center in Lincoln, Illinois. Again, it's difficult to gauge chances at resentencing. However, it should be noted that while Corey Greggory was granted a new hearing, Sarah Kolb had a request denied. So it would seem that, at least for now, the odds are heavily stacked against Kolb seeing a reduction in a prison term. Up to this point, I have presented this case as accurately and fairly as I could, leaving out my personal thoughts and opinions. To save time, I'm simply going to make a blanket warning and acknowledgement that everything after this point is the author's opinion and personal thoughts on the matter. First, I would like to offer a few thoughts about the victim, Adrianne. Much has been made about her sordid childhood, including promiscuous sex, drugs and alcohol abuse, acts of violence, and alleged false accusations of sexual abuse and physical violence against her mother and stepfather. While these are points that have to be addressed when telling the story, it's clear that Adrianne was much more than these things. By all accounts, Adrianne was a bright, energetic, fun, loyal, had a good sense of humor, and a great deal of musical talent. Who knows? If she hadn't encountered Sarah Kolb, we may have seen her on stage or screen by now. What's more, with the help of Tony and Joanne, it seems that her work with counselors and meds were paying dividends. I think one of the great tragedies we see here is that an amazing girl, just on the cusp of turning things around, never got the chance to fulfill her potential. I would like to have met the future Adrianne. I have a feeling that despite, or maybe because of her early childhood trauma, she would have become someone worth knowing.
Absolutely, I completely agree. Now, what about Adrianne's claims of abuse?
I know this question is an extremely touchy subject, but you can't research this case and not find yourself examining this question, whether you choose to share your thoughts or not. Well, wisely or not, I'm going to share mine. I do believe something occurred, whether it was mental, physical, sexual, or a mixed combination of some form of the three. I find it hard to believe that Adrianne did not encounter some or all of these destructive forces in her early life. A child simply does not turn down the road she did in a vacuum. There needs to be a catalyst. Unfortunately, we'll never likely know or have a full understanding of what she faced. Even more importantly, those responsible will probably continue to evade the punishment they deserve.
What do you believe took place during Adrianne's final hours?
I know two things for certain. First, the fact that Sarah Kolb and Corey Greggory continue, even to this day, they continue blaming and pointing the responsibility at each other. It's not only a complete crock, but it also continues to prove that they were both cowards and lack even a shred of decency or remorse.
Absolutely, especially after that long of time so far in prison. You would think that conscience-wise, all of that time and, somehow they would want to come clean. If not only just for their conscience. I completely agree.
Well, and second, I believe they both participated in the heinous act. The idea that Corey simply sat and stared out the window while the two girls fought to the death is just completely preposterous. Not from just a who the hell would do that standpoint, but the physics of the murder scene alone just don't support his story, in my opinion. The Geoprism was a compact car. The space and maneuverability just didn't exist for Sarah to have completed the job solo. This is true even if you assume that Adrianne stunned or was knocked unconscious, as it would still be difficult, if not outright impossible, for Sarah to have the space and leverage in that tiny car required to effectively strangle the girl to death from the driver's seat. However, if you add an attacker from behind Adrianne, the physics and leverage problem changes entirely. If we add the two verified weapons into the mix, the wooden handle and the belt, I think what likely occurred was this. What started as a heated verbal exchange turned physical. I think Adrianne was finally done taking crap from Sarah, so she didn't back down when the argument was vocal and stood her ground when the blows started coming. Adrianne was a scrapper, and I think Sarah faced more resistance than she expected. If I were a betting man, and I am, I would lay a wager that Adrianne had the upper hand right up until Sarah grabbed the wooden handle. Sarah stunned Adrianne enough that she could regain the upper hand and was so enraged that someone would dare fight back against her, Sarah attempted to choke Adrianne. It's possible that when it looked like Sarah was losing the struggle, the ever-loyal Corey jumped in with his belt, and that's when Sarah got the handle and started beating Adrianne. But I have a problem with that theory, mostly because Corey was essentially a lapdog, and I believe he would have waited for direction. I think it's more likely that Sarah realized she couldn't finish what she started from her position and called on Corey to help her. I would like to believe that Adrianne was unconscious and unable to see what was coming, but that is possibly just wishful thinking. To deal a knockout blow, even with the aid of a wooden handle, you'd again run into the spatial issues. In the end, it's my opinion that it took two of them to murder the strong-willed Adrianne, Corey with his belt, and Sarah to hold Adrianne back from fighting.
I completely agree. I also have a problem with someone saying, yeah, I was just staring out the window while in the middle of two girls fighting and one being beaten to death. That he just thought, okay, I'm going to take the time to take off my belt and strangle a girl. So I'm torn. As for whether it was planned beforehand as a worst case scenario or is just an impulse, I don't think we're really ever going to know that. But what was going through his mind or leading up to him strangling her, we know that for Sarah, she had already made threats to not just Adrian, but to others. This was like a normal trait of hers. The actions of Corey is what truly stumps me, because was it planned? Was it a labor of love for Sarah, or the hopes of finally getting her to love him? That's the part that stumps me and makes me kind of question everything. But in your opinion, what was your opinion of the murder cover-up?
Well, the defense from Sarah Kolb that Corey Greggory threatened her into compliance in the cover-up is just simply absurd. It is completely incongruent to everything we know about the two of them, their personal character, and their relationship dynamics. Their disastrous cover-up attempts were a scramble for self-preservation. While it is possible that Corey bore some feelings to protect Sarah mixed in, I find it highly unlikely that Sarah cared one bit about keeping Corey out of trouble.
True.
Can I be certain that Sarah didn't care about protecting Corey? I believe I can. What if I told you that the coat Adrianne was wearing mysteriously ended up in Corey's house after the murder? Because it did. Given that Corey is highly unlikely to be the one to bring her coat into his home, there is only one other possibility. Sarah was so devious that she prepared to set Corey up for the fall from the very beginning. She was also apparently delusional enough to believe that once Corey was set up, her magical powers of control over him were sufficient to keep his mouth shut. Her sacrificial lamb would willingly fall on the sword for her, right? Further, I don't really buy that their only motive for involving Nathan was the dismemberment and hiding of the body because they were squeamish over the act itself. Sure, that might have played a part. However, I think that they just couldn't keep from sharing, and they chose someone they thought that could not only be trusted, but would also approve of their actions. I mean, what good is being so badass that you can commit a murder if you can't share it?
I believe that Sarah had fulfilled her strong desire to live out her threats and was so proud of herself. As for Corey, I believe that due to his idolization of Sarah, that he believed that he too would feel the same rush, but his conscience just wouldn't allow it, unlike Sarah's. Sarah dreamed and even written about this, while Corey, on the other hand, was described before encountering Sarah as a pretty good kid. Now, what do you think about Corey breaking down and confessing?
Well, as it turns out, not only was her love slave unwilling to take the fall for her, he wasn't even willing to carry the guilt of what they had done for more than a few days. By all accounts, Corey was racked with guilt and hadn't slept a wink since the murder. Based on how he looked in the video footage of him leading the investigators to Adrianne's remains, I would buy that lack of sleep. I'm just not so sure that it was actually guilt related to Adrianne and her murder. This was not someone showing remorse and prepared to own up and face the music for his actions, in my opinion. I think the guilt he displayed was more of a, I can't believe I allowed myself to be so under someone else's control that I was willing to do these things I did, sort of guilt. Corey wasn't feeling for Adrianne. Corey was feeling for Corey.
I agree.
I believe after the heinous act, the reality set in to the situation that he'd allowed himself to be placed in. Like I said before, I think it's more a case of Corey feeling bad for Corey.
I agree. Now, in your opinion, do you believe that the murder of Adrianne was premeditated?
You know, this question, it's one I've continued to struggle with. Sarah's journaling before the murder almost seemed like a confession of intent, as does her attitude and constant threatening behavior up to that point. But that argument lends itself just as easily to the other side. Sarah was constantly writing twisted stuff, shooting off her mouth, threatening people without any follow-through. Was she just waiting for the perfect storm of opportunity to enact her twisted, murderous desires? The question of premeditation always brings me back to the location and timing. Who in the hell would pick a Taco Bell parking lot during busy lunch hour traffic, with traffic from both the drive-thru and the city's main thoroughfare, as the perfect murder spot? Is Sarah Kolb just that stupid and egotistical to think that she would get away with murder at any time and place? I'm not sold on premeditation. It's far more likely that Sarah planned a beating, but Adrianne turned the tables on her. I think this was a murder out of fear and cowardice, that she came to realize in the moment that Adrianne was more alpha than Sarah realized. If Corey had not been present, things, in my opinion, might have turned out differently. Sarah Kolb would probably have received the ass whooping she richly deserved.
Absolutely. The busy lunchtime location was definitely not an ideal situation if it was planned.
Well, for sure. And the other thing is, while I'm not sold on premeditation at this specific time and place, I do think that, based on the things that she said and wrote, that she was planning, on murdering Adrianne. But I don't think that was the time and place. I think that was more opportunity mixed with, anger at the time.
Now, should Sarah Kolb or Corey Greggory or both get, in your opinion, a reduction in sentence?
Well, look, it's hard to imagine teenagers killing each other. It's even harder to imagine them killing each other in the way poor Adrianne Reynolds met her end. Choking someone to death is as up close and personal as you can get. Even more, it takes time. More time than often depicted on screen or TV. Like 4 to 5 minutes long to completely take a life. At any point during that excruciatingly long period, one or both of them could have changed course and stopped their cruel madness.
And it truly was a heinous act, too.
Yeah, and regardless of their ages at the time, without even considering the rest of their despicable acts, this fact alone should keep them in jail for the rest of their lives. They had 240 to 300 seconds of time to have a second thought about what they were doing, and each and every second they continued was a conscious choice. So no, this was not a singular act, a quick mistake as a result of a childish brain. This was a continued stream of consciousness by both present. Sarah Kolb and Corey Greggory are right where they need to be, and where they should stay, until they reach the death sentence they willingly and callously dealt to young Adrianne, a girl full of promise, but never given the chance to be realized. Thanks for joining us for the conclusion of Killer Profiles, Sarah Kolb. This is Nathaniel
And Crystal.
saying we will see you again in a fortnight. Until then, stay safe out there and take care of yourself
And each other.
You have been listening to the True Crime Family Killer Profiles, a Leeward podcast production. We would love to hear from you. Find us on Facebook at True Crime Family Podcast and on Twitter at True Crime Fam. Also, please visit www.leewardpodcasting.com and check out some of our other shows now available. If you have a case you want the True Crime Family to cover, email us at truecrimefamily@leewardpodcasting.com. For now, stay safe out there, and we will see you next time.